There's one detail in the movie Obsession that I think almost everybody missed, and when you really explore it, it reveals something terrifying about human nature. Most people eventually realize that Bear is actually the real monster in Obsession, which means the movie has two monsters, right? Bear and whatever is possessing Nikki. But I think Obsession secretly reveals something way more disturbing. There was only ever one monster in the entire film. And once you realize who or what is actually inside Nikki, the entire meaning of the movie changes. Before we even talk about Nikki, we need to talk about Bear. Because I think a lot of people watch Obsession and initially see Bear as a victim. He's awkward, lonely, afraid of rejection. Honestly, he's relatable. And that's exactly why the movie is so disturbing. Because Bear doesn't look like a monster. He looks normal. But the moment Bear makes the wish, the movie quietly tells us who he really is. Because think about what the wish actually is. Bear doesn't wish for Nikki to genuinely fall in love with him over time. He doesn't wish for confidence or connection or even the courage to risk rejection. He wishes for certainty. He wants love without the possibility of loss, and that changes everything. Because real human love requires another person to exist separately from you. They have to be able to reject you, leave you, misunderstand you, choose something other than you. But Bear doesn't actually want that kind of love. He wants emotional safety. And the clearest moment in the entire movie is when the real Nikki briefly breaks through and basically begs Bear to kill her. She tells him she's trapped. And Bear's response isn't horror. It isn't grief. It isn't even concern for Nikki as a person. His response is, "What's so bad about being with me?" And that line reveals the entire movie. Because in that moment, Bear tells us something terrifying. He would rather be loved by a hollow imitation than risk not being loved at all. So if Bear is the real monster in Obsession, then what exactly is Nikki? Because the movie clearly tells us that something is possessing her. The real Nikki is trapped somewhere else. And throughout the film, Nikki becomes increasingly disturbing. She stares too long, acts possessive, doesn't understand boundaries, becomes obsessive and violent. So naturally, the audience assumes the movie has two monsters, Bear and some demonic entity inside Nikki. But the more I thought about Nikki's behavior, the less it actually felt demonic. And the more it felt instinctual. Because Nikki doesn't really behave like a person possessed by evil. She behaves like something that loves Bear with total, unconditional devotion. Everything becomes centered around him. There's another line that I want to talk about. There's a number on the back of the One Wish Willow. Bear calls that number and an operator answers and basically asks, "Hey, do you want to talk to Nikki?" And all we hear is screams. That's how we know that Nikki's trapped. But the other part of it is Bear asks the operator something, and the operator's response is, "Just because you chose this for her doesn't mean the love isn't real." So whatever is possessing Nikki does truly love Bear. Then the movie starts quietly dropping details that just became impossible for me to ignore. The way Nikki acts is just really emotional. The strange possessiveness, even the violence itself doesn't really feel malicious. It feels territorial, animalistic, instinctive. And once I started looking at the movie through that lens, I realized obsession may have secretly been telling us what was inside Nikki the entire time. And that's when it hit me. I don't think the thing inside Nikki was a demon at all. I think it was Sandy, Bear's cat. And once you see it, the entire movie starts to rewire itself, because Nikki doesn't act like a demonic entity trying to corrupt Bear. She acts like a pet whose entire world is its owner. That's why her behavior feels so strange. Not human strange, but animal strange. The obsession, the territorial behavior, the constant need for closeness, the inability to understand boundaries, even the violence. A cat doesn't morally process love the way humans do. A pet does not understand healthy attachment, autonomy, or emotional separation. Its owner is everything. And suddenly, scenes that felt random became incredibly specific. The shrine, the way Nikki watches Bear, the mirrored deaths between Sandy and Bear, the way Nikki behaves less like an evil force and more like something operating on instinct. Even the violence stops feeling demonic. It feels protective, territorial, like an animal removing threats from its environment. And that is where the movie completely changes. Because if Nikki is actually being occupied by Sandy, then the second monster in the movie isn't evil at all. Sandy is innocent. She's just loving Bear the only way an animal knows how. Which means there was only ever one real monster in obsession. Now, at first, the idea that Sandy somehow lives on through Nikki sounds completely ridiculous, but the movie keeps quietly associating Nikki with Sandy in ways that become harder and harder to ignore. After spending the night with Bear, Nikki digs up Sandy's corpse and creates a shrine for her. And what's disturbing is that Nikki genuinely believes this will make Bear happy. From a normal human perspective, this feels insane, but from the perspective of animal behavior, it actually makes weird emotional sense. Animals, especially cats, will often bring dead things to the people they love, not as cruelty, but as affection, as gifts. Then later, Nikki makes lunch for Bear, and the movie heavily implies that she feeds him Sandy. Again, viewed normally, it feels monstrous, but viewed through the lens of animal behavior, it feels strangely consistent. Nikki keeps expressing love in ways that feel completely inhuman, but weirdly animalistic. Then the movie starts giving Nikki behaviors that feel less symbolic and more instinctual. There's a scene where Bear leaves for work while Nikki stays home alone. When he comes back, Nikki hasn't moved from the same spot. She's urinated and defecated on the floor and awkwardly explains that she ate a bug before correcting herself. It's uncomfortable because it feels less like an adult woman malfunctioning and more like a house pet left alone too long. At night, Nikki wanders around the apartment in the dark, making strange noises and moving erratically while Bear tries to sleep. And if you've ever owned a cat, this behavior feels weirdly familiar. The nighttime zoomies, the random movement, the noises in the dark, the unsettling feeling of another creature awake while you're trying to rest. The movie never directly says any of this. It just quietly layers the association over and over again. There's even the disturbing party scene where Nikki violently harms herself after thinking she sees a bug. On its own, the moment feels random, but combined with everything else, it starts feeling intentional. Cats are hyper-reactive predators. Sudden movement completely shifts their behavior. Nikki doesn't react like a person in these moments. She reacts instinctively. But The detail that completely changed the way I saw the movie is the ending. At the beginning of the film, Bear discovers that Sandy died after getting into pills inside a cabinet. At the end of the movie, Bear does the same exact thing. He takes pills, realizes it was a mistake, tries to throw them back up, and dies exactly like Sandy did. The deaths mirror each other so precisely that it stops feeling accidental. It feels a bit karmic. Now, if Sandy really is inside of Nikki, that's what really makes Obsession so terrifying. Not the possession, not the violence, not even Bear. The real horror is what Sandy represents. Because technically, Sandy's love for Bear is perfect. It's unconditional, total, and completely devoted. Bear becomes her entire world. And that sounds beautiful at first, until you realize that kind of love is only possible because Sandy isn't human. A real human being has boundaries. A real human being can reject you, leave you, need space from you, desire things outside of you. But Sandy can't. And I think that's the terrifying truth the movie accidentally reveals about human beings. We are slowly beginning to crave love that is no longer human. That's why this movie feels weirdly modern, because the world is already moving in this direction. Algorithms learn exactly what you want and feed it back to you endlessly. Social media creates personalized, emotional realities. AI girlfriends and boyfriends are becoming normal. People increasingly want relationships without rejection, attention without vulnerability, validation without another person's freedom. In other words, love without another human consciousness attached to it. And that's exactly what Bear chooses. The real Nikki is trapped somewhere screaming for help, and Bear still chooses the replacement. Because what he actually wanted was never Nikki. He wanted certainty, and Obsession asks a horrifying question. If human beings could receive perfect devotion without risk, rejection, or independence, would most people even choose human love anymore? And maybe that's why Obsession feels so disturbing even after it ends, because on the surface, the movie looks like a horror story about toxic love. But underneath that, it may actually be about the death of human love itself. The scariest part of the movie isn't that Bear accidentally wished for a monster. It's that the perfect love he receives can only exist once humanity is removed from it. And maybe that's where we're headed to. Toward relationships that are safer, easier, more customizable, more obedient, but less human. Because real love has always required something terrifying. Another consciousness. Another person with the freedom to reject you. And the moment we remove that freedom, love stops being human at all.